Hello, and welcome to the Human Being 101 podcast. I'm Kathleen Schafer, and this is Conversations with Kathleen, where we discuss how to live the mission of the Human Being Store: better people, better work, better world. Our work at the Human Being Store is based on a new way of leading in our careers and our lives, and this podcast focuses on how to do this through the lens of current events. Well, there's no greater current event happening this week than the impeachment hearings and trial of President Trump. It has, captured the attention of the country and indeed the world. And as someone who has spent her career working with elected officials in public policy, public campaigns, this is indeed a moment for us to reflect on as who we are as a nation, as what we want from our democracy, of how we want to lead, and indeed, what is it that we want from our leaders. And so this week, I am going to be talking about impeachment, not from a political perspective, rather from a leadership perspective, and what that means for us as individuals and what this means for us as a country. So I'd like to begin by discussing, how did we get here? What's happening as the backdrop for this impeachment trial? And, I find it fascinating that at a time in 2020, when we have access to so much information, when, with just a few clicks of any kind of device that we're using, we can find out what's happening anywhere in the world, or, facts and figures that people have access to from thousands of years ago. It's all readily available to us. And at a moment when we have so much information that we can access so easily, so many people have chosen to become hyper-focused on certain kinds of information or certain kinds of views in light of feeling overwhelmed by the vastness of what's available to us. It's an understandable reaction, and yet one of the downsides to this is that we now are micro-focusing where we're getting our information, who it's coming from, and not always understanding that there's a particular lens of how this information is being presented, because we have become so micro-focused. And through that micro-focusing, when any information comes in that is either contrary or something that we don't believe, we tend to dismiss it. And this is happening for everybody across the spectrum. So one of the sad points for me as I watch all of this unfold is that depending on where and how one is getting their information about what is unfolding here, is you get two completely different stories. And that's a problem when people are starting and thinking and looking at this from this very hyper-focused way, both as the individuals who are participating in impeachment and for those of us who are watching it. It's because through that hyper-focusing, we're missing a lot, which really leads to my second point, which is, okay, if being hyper-focused is not leading us towards solution, if it's not allowing us to move forward collectively in a way that we all may feel good about, then what's the corollary to that? And the corollary is that effective leaders are people who are able to step back from driving toward just one particular outcome, and they are able to see the vastness of what is happening and all of the distinctions and differences that are being presented around any set of issues. For those of you who have known and studied and worked with me throughout the years, you've heard me talk about this with Ron Heifetz's definition, where he says effective leaders are able to get on the balcony, that they're able to get above the fray and to be able to see the entirety of what's happening. And from that space of acceptance of the entirety, you now open up to the possibility of a variety of solutions or ways forward, and not just driving toward one particular outcome. The reason that getting on the balcony or having a broader perspective becomes challenging for many leaders, particularly many elected officials, is that when you get on the balcony, the first thing you begin to recognize is that most people have cognitive dissonance on these very hot button issues. That is to say, that they hold conflicting beliefs and values about what's happening. I don't like how the president conducts himself, but I like what he's doing on the economy, so that's what we're going to do. Or I don't like how he handled this issue, and yet I don't think that, getting rid of a president is a good idea. I mean, whatever it is, not from a partisan perspective, but from a cognitive dissonant perspective, this is what most people are unwilling, most public leaders and all of us as individuals too, are willing to, we're not even willing to acknowledge it, let alone deal with how do we untwist ourselves from this. And this is really the at the essence of what leadership brings, and what we're not seeing at all in our current elected officials is, how do we resolve the dissonance? How do we get to a middle point? How do we find a way forward that encompasses all of what's being felt, as opposed to just driving toward one hyper-focused outcome that leaves, a few people as winners and many, many people as losers. And in this win-lose way of moving forward, we're losing the ability to help all of us relieve some of this dissonance on these issues and find a way to come together. And again, what is effective leadership? Effective leadership is the ability to bring people together to create solutions. So we've got hyper-focused leadership driving us toward whatever it is that they want. We have very few people, individuals and officials, who are willing to get up on the balcony and take this broader perspective to recognize where the dissidents exist. And then, which is really the third piece here of leadership today, it's to get curious about how we can begin to bring the various viewpoints together to create a cohesive way forward, because there is one. It does exist, but it takes somebody who's willing to stand in this place of acknowledging that there are conflicts, and to get curious about being open to learning about how to do this differently and how to do it better, to be able to take what he or she is bringing as a leader and to also be able to integrate what other people are bringing as well. But that isn't what we tend to like in our current elected officials. We as an electorate like people who present us their ideas and their views and their positions all wrapped up tightly and neatly in a nice package with a nice bow, and we don't want them ever to deviate from it. When in fact, effective leadership is about the ability to stand in these places and to get curious and to ask questions and to think about what's possible and to see things that maybe we hadn't been able to see before, because we're willing to take in information that we might not have known. So when we look at what's happening with impeachment, when we get upset and frustrated, when we tune it out because it doesn't agree with what we think, my call to you this week is to suggest, what is that saying about us as individuals? Are we practicing the kind of leadership that we'd like to see? Are we hyper-focused on certain outcomes and points of view that we're unwilling to deviate from? Are we practicing getting on the balcony and being able to see the bigger picture and understand that there are multiple perspectives? And are we willing to get curious and to get in there and to be able to acknowledge that we might not have all of the answer or all of the answers, but that we have the desire and the ability to bring people together to contribute so that we get the best possible answer, the best possible way forward, that next step. In the end, when we start to understand and recognize what works best for us as individuals, and we start practicing it in our lives, with our families, in our organizations, in our communities, that's how we're going to begin to change how our elected leaders are actually leading. Because in the end, they're a reflection of us. So this impeachment trial, this kind of knot that we're in at the national level, it's just a reflection of the knot that we all carry day to day about how is it that we want to lead. And from my experience working with hundreds and thousands of people on these issues during the last 30 years, most people want to find a way forward. They want to live in harmony with others. And the way to do that is to soften our gaze, is to not be hyper-focused, to see that there are a lot of different ways of seeing circumstances and situations, and to get curious, to be willing to be open and to come together, because in the end, again, it's what most of us want. I'm Kathleen Schafer. I appreciate you listening this week, and I look forward to talking with you next.